The alien ships, vast and insidious, descended upon the planet like a plague of locusts. Their sleek, metallic hulls blotted out the sun, casting the world into an eerie twilight. The invaders, with their chillingly precise technology, unleashed destruction with no remorse. Entire nations fell within hours. The alien weaponry disintegrated buildings, vaporized soldiers, and left only the echoes of a planet fighting its final battle. In the chaos, humanity's hope was almost extinguished. But not everyone had given up. On the front lines of the war, a small but determined group of survivors, scientists, soldiers, and civilians refused to accept extinction. They fought back not with overwhelming force but with ingenuity, bravery, and the relentless will to survive. Their survival was a testament to humanity's defiance, a refusal to let the world burn without one last fight. Among them was Ilara, a young scientist, who had been working on the bleeding edge of humanity's technological advancements before the invasion. Now, her skills were put to a different kind of test. Alongside her were Commander Yeager and Lieutenant Marks, both battle-hardened soldiers whose lives had been consumed by the war. With them, a team of civilian engineers and other scientists who had banded together in the last stronghold of the resistance, the remnants of what was once a thriving metropolis, now a shadow of its former self. Yeager, whose rugged face had been carved by years of war, was never without his rifle and a tactical demeanor. His eyes held the weight of countless lost battles, yet he never wavered. Marks, younger but equally hardened, was a force in her own right, commanding respect with every move. Both had seen the world crumble, but they still held the belief that humanity could prevail. Together, they led this ragtag group, knowing that the odds were insurmountable, but their unity was their greatest weapon. The first encounter had been like a waking nightmare. When the aliens first touched down, they hadn't attacked directly. Instead, they waited. Watched. But it wasn't long before the air thickened with tension. The invaders' warships' massive, silent leviathans had unleashed their ground forces in relentless waves. Their foot soldiers were terrifying, towering creatures with weapons that tore through tanks like paper, their movements quick and precise, their intentions clear. They wanted Earth, and they would burn everything in their way to take it. Ilara had been with the team when they made contact with the first wave. They had barely made it to the outskirts of the city when they heard the low hum of alien technology echoing through the desolate streets. The air crackled with energy, as if charged by the presence of something far beyond anything humanity had encountered. "Stay low," Yeager whispered, his voice a low growl. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." The small group, cloaked in the remnants of the city's broken infrastructure, moved cautiously toward the alien encampment. It had been a desperate plan: infiltrate, learn, and perhaps sabotage whatever they could to slow the invaders down. But as they drew closer, the air itself seemed to shift, becoming heavier, thicker, like something alive. And then they saw them. The invaders were not what Ilara had expected. Their appearance was alien, sure, but not grotesque. They were tall, almost ethereal, with long, flowing limbs and smooth, metallic skin that shimmered under the fading sunlight. Their eyes, however, were what unnerved Ilara the most, vast pools of black that seemed to absorb light, reflecting nothing but the void. "Contact!" shouted Marks, breaking the silence with a sharp command. The first shots were fired in an instant. The battle that followed was brutal. Humanity's weapons, though advanced, were no match for the alien forces. The invaders moved with fluid precision, their technology outstripping Earth's by centuries, if not more. For every alien that fell, 2 more replaced them, their numbers seemingly endless. Ilara, caught in the fray, had felt an intense surge of desperation. She wasn't a soldier, she was a scientist, a thinker, not a killer. But in that moment, her mind raced with calculations, strategies, anything to turn the tide. She caught sight of an alien craft hovering nearby, its core glowing ominously. A risky plan formed in her mind. "Cover me!" she shouted, taking off toward the vessel. Yeager's team, under heavy fire, responded with precision, creating a brief opening in the alien ranks. Ilara dove into the underbrush, heart pounding, the alien craft looming ever closer. She knew she had only one shot. With trembling hands, she deployed a device they had been working on for months, a makeshift EMP, designed to disable alien tech. The pulse of energy detonated, sending a shock wave through the air, and for a moment, everything went silent. The alien forces staggered, momentarily disoriented. It was enough time for humanity's soldiers to strike back. Jaeger and Marks led the charge, pushing the invaders back inch by inch. But just as the tide seemed to turn, Ilara's heart sank. A new sound filled the air, low, guttural, and unmistakably alien. The ground shook beneath them as a massive figure emerged from the wreckage. Its body was unlike anything they had seen before, massive, covered in thick, dark armor, with tendrils that reached out like the limbs of a monstrous insect. It was unlike any creature they had fought before. It was no soldier, it was a force of nature, a creature of pure destruction. The air thickened again, a new kind of dread settling over the team. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight against something far worse than they had imagined. The soldiers faltered, caught off guard by the creature's overwhelming presence. Ilara watched in horror as the massive being advanced, its eyes glowing with an eerie intensity. This was not just a battle for Earth's survival. This was a war against an enemy that would stop at nothing to extinguish humanity. Jaeger, his face hardening, locked eyes with Ilara. "We need to fall back. Now." But before they could react, the sky above them erupted with a flash of light. The alien creature froze for a moment, then let out an unearthly scream as its body jerked violently. But as the team retreated, Ilara's gaze turned upward. What she saw was a new ship, massive and dark, descending from the clouds. And with it, a feeling of dread that chilled her to the bone. The creature had been nothing more than a harbinger. The true invasion had only just begun. As they ran, Ilara's mind raced. The tide of battle had shifted once again. They had barely survived the first encounter, but they couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far darker. Something had just awoken, and it wasn't just the invaders they had to fear. The ship, a stranger to them, had arrived. And with it, something far worse than the invaders. Something that would haunt them all. The human resistance had begun to regroup in the remnants of the old city, now a labyrinth of crumbling buildings and shattered streets. The walls, once symbols of humanity's triumph, now stood as silent witnesses to the war. Inside the makeshift base, the air was thick with a sense of urgency. Time was running out, and with the appearance of the new alien ship, the Resistance's window for striking back was shrinking fast. Ilara sat in a darkened corner of the command center, her mind racing. The EMP she had deployed had been a small victory, but it had come at a cost. Their most advanced weapon was still in its infancy, and the aliens had adapted quickly. Jaeger had been the first to acknowledge it. The invaders weren't just an external threat, they were a reflection of the darkness humanity had failed to see until it was too late. As she reviewed the data they had gathered, she felt the weight of that realization press down on her chest. "Are we sure that ship we saw is just a reckoned vessel?" Jaeger's voice interrupted her thoughts. He stood at the door to the command room, his silhouette dark against the flickering lights inside. "Reckon or not, it's more than we can handle," Ilara responded without looking up, her fingers tracing the holographic projection of the alien craft. It was unlike any ship they had encountered before, sleek, with an unsettling symmetry, and seemingly designed to be both a war machine and a symbol of the invaders' power. "It's part of something bigger. They're preparing for something far worse." Jaeger nodded. His sharp eyes were tired, but still intense. "We need answers, and fast. That thing isn't here for reckon, it's a sign. Whatever's coming next, we need to be ready." A few paces away, Marks was sitting with the other soldiers, their equipment laid out before them. She was studying a new set of weapon schematics, trying to find a way to turn the tide. She was always the optimist, the one who believed they could still win, no matter the odds. But even her hope was beginning to wear thin. The battle had been fierce, but humanity's resilience had kept them in the fight. The aliens were formidable, their weaponry destructive, but the resistance had learned to adapt. Engineers and scientists had reverse-engineered parts of the alien tech, and though they couldn't replicate it, they had started developing hybrid systems creating makeshift weapons, armor, and tools designed to exploit the few weaknesses they'd uncovered. It wasn't enough to win the war, but it was enough to survive, to fight on, and that was all they could hope for. But Ilara knew that they were still playing catch-up. The invaders were not just an external force, they were a challenge to the very essence of what humanity had built. She glanced at Marx, who was now tapping away at a control panel, frowning as she input new data. Marx had grown into an unexpected leader in her own right, her instincts sharp and her will unyielding. But even she seemed to feel the gravity of the situation. "Do you think we can hold them off?" Ilara asked quietly, more to herself than to Jaeger. Jaeger didn't respond immediately. He walked over to the map table, examining the positions of their forces and the alien encroachments. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "I've fought in enough wars to know that sometimes, it's not about holding them off. It's about making them bleed. If we can slow them down, if we can find the right opening." "Then what?" Ilara interjected. "We don't have enough time. We're outnumbered. They'll adapt faster than we can. This new ship is just the beginning. We're in the dark here, Jaeger. We need to know what we're really dealing with." "I know," Jaeger muttered, his jaw tight. He didn't need to say it. The fear was their fear of the unknown, of what would happen if they didn't figure out the invaders' strategy. Fear that humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, but fighting against a force that was so far beyond them that they might never understand it. Back at the front lines, the soldiers fought with all their might, using every scrap of knowledge they had to try to anticipate the aliens' next move. They weren't just facing superior weaponry, they were up against an intelligence that had no need for mercy. The invaders' strategies were always unpredictable, their next steps impossible to predict. As the resistance adapted, the invaders adapted faster. The first signs that the aliens were preparing something devastating came during a nighttime assault. The resistance had set up a series of ambushes along a major road that the invaders had been using to transport supplies. For hours, they had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. But when the time came, when the first explosions rocked the alien convoy, the response was immediate and overwhelming. What had initially seemed like a minor skirmish turned into a full-scale offensive. The aliens had been holding back until now. "Get out of there!" Jaeger shouted into the comms. "Fall back to the secondary position, now!" But it was too late. The alien forces had anticipated the ambush, had known where the resistance would strike before they even made their move. The soldiers had underestimated them, an error that could cost them dearly. As the team withdrew, Ilara saw the true scale of the invaders' power. The ground rumbled as massive alien walkers, towering behemoths covered in thick, exoskeletal armor, appeared on the horizon. The walkers' weapons were like nothing they had ever seen, energy blasts that vaporized everything in their path. Ilara's mind raced. They couldn't outrun those things. They could barely hold their ground against the alien soldiers, let alone these new war machines. "Hold the line!" Jaeger barked, but even his voice was tinged with desperation. They had no choice but to fight back. Marx, her rifle clutched tightly in her hands, stood tall alongside Jaeger, her face steely with determination. Ilara, despite her lack of combat experience, was at their side. They fired everything they had, but it wasn't enough. The walkers moved relentlessly forward, and their weapons tore through human defenses like tissue paper. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the alien walkers, damaged by a direct hit from a hybrid weapon, staggered and collapsed to the ground. The resistance fighters, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, surged forward, seizing the opportunity. Jaeger led the charge, his battle-hardened instincts kicking in, coordinating the attack with brutal precision. It wasn't much, but for the first time in weeks, Ilara saw a glimmer of hope. Humanity wasn't just surviving, it was adapting, learning to fight back. As the alien walkers fell one by one, the invaders began to pull back, retreating into the shadows. It was a rare victory, fragile, fleeting, but significant. The resistance had held their ground. But Ilara knew better than to get comfortable. Every victory came with a price, and every win brought the aliens closer to understanding humanity's tactics. Back at the base, the group gathered to assess the situation. Jaeger, despite his usual calm demeanor, was pacing nervously. This isn't over. We've seen what they can do, and they're not going to let us get away with this. They're going to hit us harder next time. Mark slammed her fist onto the table, frustration mounting. We can't keep playing defense. We need a plan. Something that'll hit them where it hurts. We need to go on the offensive. But Ilara had a different idea. We need to find out what they're really after, she said, her voice quiet but firm. If we don't understand their true goals, we're fighting blind. We need to find their command center, their heart. If we can disrupt their leadership, maybe we stand a chance. Jaeger nodded slowly. It's a risky move, but it might be the only way. We'll need to be fast, precise. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew that if they failed, it wouldn't just be the end of the mission, it would be the end of their fight for survival. As Ilara's mind turned over the possibilities, something gnawed at her. A sense of unease, a feeling that someone was watching them. She glanced up, meeting Jaeger's eyes. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of doubt there, something he hadn't expressed before. But before she could say anything, a voice crackled over the comms. This is it, the voice said, cold and distant. The next wave is coming. And it's not what you're expecting. The word sent a chill down Ilara's spine. Who's this? Jaeger demanded. But the transmission was already over, leaving only static behind. The resistance had no choice but to prepare for what was coming next, but deep in Ilara's gut, she couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker was approaching. The invaders' true power remained a mystery. And as they readied themselves for the next battle, Ilara couldn't help but wonder, were they fighting the aliens or something else entirely? The days following the successful ambush of the alien walkers were tense, filled with a mix of anticipation and grim determination. The resistance had gained a momentary advantage, but they all knew that their survival was still hanging by a thread. Each victory, no matter how hard won, felt fleeting in the face of the overwhelming alien threat. They were constantly fighting against time and the creeping fear that they were too far behind in understanding the true scope of the war. As the resistance regrouped, a sense of unease began to permeate the ranks. The soldiers were exhausted, the civilians were terrified, and even the most optimistic of the scientists couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something critical. Ilara felt it most acutely. The invaders had shown themselves to be far more than just conquerors. They were calculating, methodical, and utterly indifferent to human life. But there was something else, something deeper that felt even more insidious. It was as if they were playing a game they had already won, only waiting for the right moment to make their final move. In the heart of the makeshift base, amidst the war-torn remnants of a once thriving city, Ilara pored over the data they had managed to collect from the alien tech. She had spent countless hours analyzing the strange artifacts they had salvaged, trying to decipher the patterns hidden within the advanced weaponry, communication systems, and alien machinery. But the more she uncovered, the less it made sense. Everything about the invaders seemed too perfect, too deliberate, as though every detail was part of a larger design, something far beyond their understanding. One evening, as Ilara sat hunched over a holographic projection of the alien command ship, her eyes narrowed at the strange energy signatures emanating from it, Jaeger entered the room. His face was grim, his jaw clenched with that familiar tension that only came after a battle had gone wrong. "We've been getting strange reports from the front," Jaeger said, his voice low and measured. "Something's off. The aliens, they're not just attacking us anymore. There," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They're hunting us." Ilara looked up, her brow furrowed. "Hunting us? What do you mean?" "I mean they're not just looking for resistance forces anymore. They're targeting our leadership, Our scientists. They found a pattern in our movements, Ilara. They know exactly where to hit us hardest. A chill ran down Ilara's spine. So it's not just about the war? They're after something more specific? Jaeger nodded. Exactly. They're trying to break us from the inside. And they're good at it. It wasn't just the soldiers who were feeling the pressure, the whole resistance was beginning to crack under the strain. The civilians, once hopeful, were beginning to show signs of fear. Fear that they were fighting a losing battle. Fear that their families might be next. That the aliens weren't just invading, they were orchestrating humanity's downfall on every level. Ilara had seen this before. In the darkest corners of human history, when the pressure of war and loss had driven people to doubt everything they once believed in. But this was different. This was something far more insidious. Meanwhile, Marx and the other soldiers were feeling the weight of the war in a different way. They had fought countless battles, had held the line more times than they cared to remember, but now they were beginning to question their own tactics. They were getting smarter, more efficient, but so were the invaders. Every time they gained ground, the enemy adapted with terrifying speed. Marx spent long hours strategizing with Jaeger, trying to find new ways to outmaneuver the alien forces. But the truth was becoming clear to them all: they weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to uncover a hidden truth, one that could change the very fabric of the war. They had been making progress with the alien technology, reverse engineering their weapons and adapting them to human use. But there was a new development, an idea that had come from one of the engineers, a civilian named Rhea, who had been working alongside Ilara. She had discovered a peculiar anomaly in the alien tech, something that didn't belong. It was an encrypted signal that didn't appear to be part of any weapon or defensive system. It was something else entirely. Ilara and Rhea worked late into the night to crack the code, pushing the limits of their knowledge and expertise. When the breakthrough came, it was nothing short of a revelation. The signal they had uncovered wasn't just a transmission, it was a message. It came through in fragments at first, cryptic and barely decipherable, but over time, they began to piece it together. The message was unmistakable: the invaders had not come to Earth by accident. They had been watching humanity for centuries, studying its weaknesses and its potential. They hadn't just come to conquer, they had come to harvest. Humanity was a resource, something the aliens had been preparing to extract for an unknown purpose. The wars, the invasions, the chaos, it was all part of a larger plan to strip the Earth of its most valuable asset, its people. This discovery sent shockwaves through the resistance. It explained so much: the strategic strikes against key leadership, the targeting of specific civilians with expertise, the sudden advances in alien weaponry. The invaders weren't just out to take over Earth, they were conducting an experiment, one with far darker implications than anyone could have imagined. Jaeger was the first to speak after the revelation. His expression had hardened, as though the weight of this new truth had settled like a heavy burden on his shoulders. If they're harvesting us. His voice trailed off, unable to fully grasp the horror of it. We need to find out how deep this goes, Ilara said, her mind already racing with the implications. We can't just stop them from winning the war. We have to stop them from taking what they came for. But as they prepared for their next move, something else was happening within the ranks. The pressure of the war, the constant losses, and the realization of the true nature of the invaders was starting to take its toll. Even Jaeger, the unshakable commander, was beginning to show signs of doubt. There was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He had always believed that humanity's strength lay in its ability to fight, to adapt, to endure, but now, that belief was beginning to crack. Marx, too, felt it. The battles had become harder, and the cost of each victory more painful. She found herself questioning the very things that had driven her: her hope, her conviction, her belief in the resistance's cause. Could they really defeat an enemy so vast, so calculating? And then, there was the unknown factor, something that had been gnawing at Ilara ever since the cryptic message had been uncovered. The signal had mentioned something that didn't make sense. A name. A person. Caltha. Who or what was Caltha? Was it another alien leader? A weapon? A technology? Elara couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Caltha was, it was the key to everything. But before she could delve deeper into her thoughts, a new transmission came through the same cold, distant voice that had spoken to them before. "This is your last warning," the voice crackled over the comms. "Surrender now, or the next wave will destroy you all." The message ended abruptly, and for a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then, as if on cue, the ground trembled. Outside, the sound of engines roared. The aliens were coming again, but this time, something was different. There was a new urgency in their movements, a new kind of strategy. This wasn't just another assault. This was something bigger. Yeager turned to Elara. "We need a plan. And we need it now." But as they scrambled to prepare for the coming onslaught, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle had only just begun. The invaders were not just fighting to take Earth, they were fighting to unlock something far worse than anyone could have imagined. The clock was ticking, and the resistance was running out of time. The war had just taken a turn. And the next phase would reveal the darkness that lay at the heart of the invasion, something that would change everything. The resistance forces had gathered quickly, rallying around the command center with renewed purpose. The alien invasion had reached its most brutal phase, but for the first time in weeks, there was a palpable sense of hope in the air. They were fighting back, adapting in ways that were beginning to turn the tide. The battle-hardened soldiers had learned to exploit the invaders' weaknesses, striking at key positions, and their ingenuity with alien technology had started to yield impressive results. They had made real progress, and their victories, though costly, were beginning to feel like tangible proof that the war could be won. Yeager, Marks, and Elara had spent the past few hours coordinating the final push. They had a plan, a way to strike at the heart of the alien command structure and possibly cripple their ability to coordinate attacks. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. They had discovered the location of a major alien base, a central hub where the invaders were gathering their forces for what seemed like a final assault. If they could infiltrate that base, sabotage the command center, and take out the leadership, they might have a fighting chance of crippling the entire invasion force. With the plan in place, the resistance was ready to move. The sound of footsteps echoed through the base as soldiers prepared their gear, checked their weapons, and said their final goodbyes. Even in the face of the unknown, there was a quiet confidence, an understanding that they were not just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for a future. Elara, however, felt a sense of unease she couldn't shake. Despite their growing successes, something deep within her told her that they were walking into a trap, one they couldn't yet comprehend. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the cryptic messages, the strange patterns in the invaders' movements, and the unshakable feeling that someone was manipulating the course of the war gnawed at her thoughts. She walked over to Yeager, who was reviewing the mission briefing one last time. His sharp eyes met hers, a flicker of concern hidden beneath his usual stoic expression. "You don't look convinced," he said, sensing her hesitation. "I'm not," Elara replied, her voice low. "It's too clean. Too convenient. They've been pushing us to the brink, but now they're just letting us walk right into their stronghold. It doesn't add up." Yeager's gaze hardened, but he didn't argue. "It's a risk, I know. But it's the only one we have. We're doing this for the people who are counting on us. If we don't take this chance, we're just prolonging the inevitable." Elara nodded, knowing he was right. But the feeling of dread persisted, growing stronger as the moments passed. Something was off, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. Still, there was no turning back now. The resistance had made its choice. They moved out under the cover of darkness, the city's ruins casting long shadows as they made their way toward the alien base. The plan was simple in theory: infiltrate the compound, disable the power grid, and neutralize the alien leadership before they had a chance to respond. But as the resistance forces neared the base, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her senses heightened, every footstep, every whisper of wind seeming to echo in her mind. It was when they were less than a kilometer from the base that the first true shockwave hit. The ground beneath them trembled, not from explosions or gunfire, but from something far more sinister. A deep, resonating hum, like the sound of something vast awakening, reverberated through the earth. The sky above, dark and stormy, crackled with violent energy, casting an eerie light over the landscape. Then, as if to confirm their worst fears, the ground split open in front of them. A massive rift tore through the earth, as though the planet itself were being sliced open. From the dark, gaping maw, a torrent of strange, swirling energy erupted, spilling into the atmosphere. The air grew thick, suffocating, and the temperature plummeted. The entire resistance force halted in their tracks, unsure of what to make of the spectacle unfolding before them. The rift was widening, and from within it, something was emerging. Jaeger immediately barked orders, but it was already too late. From the depths of the rift, a colossal structure began to rise. It was like nothing they had ever seen. The shape of it was both alien and familiar, its jagged, crystalline spires reaching into the sky, pulsing with unnatural energy. It looked almost like a living thing, the way it shifted and groaned, as if it were waking up. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances, their weapons raised in reflex, but none of them knew what they were facing. "What in the hell is that?" Marks whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I don't know," Jaeger replied, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of enemy movement. But the world around them had become eerily silent. "But it's not part of the plan. This isn't just another alien attack. This is something else entirely." The resistance soldiers were paralyzed, caught between their mission and the inexplicable horror unfolding before them. The air around the rift seemed to distort, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Then, as if responding to the energy emanating from the rift, the ground shook once more, and something began to crawl out from within the structure. At first, it was barely visible, just a glimmer of movement in the darkness. But then, the shape became clearer, and what emerged from the rift left the resistance speechless. It was a figure, a towering entity that dwarfed the alien walkers they had battled earlier. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were grotesque and nightmarish, covered in shifting, organic armor that seemed to pulse with dark energy. The thing was immense, its presence overwhelming, and as it stepped forward, the ground buckled beneath its feet. Every movement it made seemed to distort reality itself, bending light and space around it. Jaeger's voice came through the comms, tense with shock. "Fall back! Fall back now!" But it was too late. The entity raised its hand, and with a single gesture, the sky itself seemed to shatter. A beam of blinding light shot down from the heavens, striking the earth with such force that the resistance soldiers were sent flying. Ilara's vision blurred as she was thrown to the ground, her head spinning, but even through the chaos, one thing was clear: the invaders had not just come to conquer, they had come to awaken something far worse. The rift closed behind the entity, sealing itself with a low, resonating hum. The thing loomed above them, its eyes glowing with a sickening light, as if it were studying them. Its presence alone felt like a death sentence, like the air had been drained from the world around them. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature spoke. "I am Caltha," it said, its voice a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate within their very bones. "You have no idea what you have unleashed." The revelation hit them like a tidal wave. Caltha, the name they had uncovered in the alien signal. But this wasn't an alien leader or a weapon. It was something older. Something far more powerful. And now, the resistance was facing a force that dwarfed the invaders themselves, a creature that could rewrite the very laws of reality. Ilara felt her heart race. The truth they had uncovered, the hidden agenda behind the invasion, it was all part of something far darker. The invaders had been preparing for this moment, waiting for the right time to release Caltha. But why? Before she could process it further, the sky above them pulsed again, and the first wave of alien soldiers appeared, descending from their ships in a shower of light. They weren't here to conquer, they were here to ensure Caltha's victory. Jaeger's voice crackled in her earpiece, full of urgency and dread. "We need to get out of here now. We can't fight this thing." But Ilara stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The war had shifted again, and now, humanity was facing a decision that would determine its survival. Caltha was the key to everything. But what was its true purpose? And could they stop it before it was too late? The air was thick with tension, the ground beneath the resistance forces shuddering as Caltha loomed above them, an almost incomprehensible force of destruction. Every inch of their bodies screamed for retreat, but there was nowhere to run. The alien soldiers descending from the ships were like a tidal wave, merciless and unrelenting, and Caltha's presence bent the very atmosphere, distorting reality with every breath it took. It was as if the world itself had been twisted, leaving the resistance no escape. Jaeger's voice cut through the static, his words harsh with urgency. "We've got one chance. One chance to end this." But Ilara didn't need to be told. They all knew. The war wasn't just about stopping the invaders anymore, it was about stopping Caltha. The entity wasn't just another weapon in the alien arsenal. It was the catalyst of their entire invasion. And if it wasn't stopped now, the fabric of existence itself might be irreparably torn apart. Caltha's deep, guttural voice reverberated in their minds, seeping into their consciousness. "You are insignificant. You cannot comprehend the power I wield." As the first wave of invader soldiers charged toward them, the resistance held their ground. Marx, who had become a battle-hardened warrior in the time they'd spent fighting for survival, took her place at the front of the line. She didn't flinch as an alien soldier charged toward her with a weapon raised. With practiced precision, she fired, taking down one after another, her every move a testament to her experience. But it was clear to her, to all of them, that the odds had never been more impossible. They couldn't keep fighting the aliens while Caltha stood there, an immovable force of nature. Ilara, moving alongside Jaeger and the others, activated the alien tech they had reverse-engineered. The weapons hummed with alien energy, but even their most advanced weapons couldn't penetrate the force field Caltha emitted. As they fired, the energy merely refracted around him, his form bending the attack as though it were nothing. Ilara felt her resolve waver for a moment, the weight of their loss already heavy in her chest. There had to be something else. There had to be a way. "Focus!" Jaeger's voice brought her back to reality, and she snapped back into action. But just as they were about to fall back and reassess their strategy, an unexpected twist shattered the battlefield. The ground rumbled again, not from Caltha's power, but from beneath their feet. There was a faint sound, almost like the grinding of metal, followed by a massive eruption. From the heart of the alien base, buried deep underground, a vast structure began to rise, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings. Ilara's heart skipped a beat as she realized what it was. It wasn't a weapon. It was a ship. A massive, hidden vessel, ancient in design, more advanced than anything the aliens had revealed thus far. And then, it hit her their entire plan, the purpose behind Caltha's arrival. This ship wasn't just for transporting soldiers, it was designed to harness energy far beyond what any of the resistance forces had ever encountered. It was a vessel for extracting and amplifying the very energy that Caltha radiated. The invaders weren't trying to conquer Earth for resources, they were using Earth to fuel something far worse. Caltha was the key to awakening an ancient, unimaginable weapon, and it was powered by the planet itself. The rift they had witnessed earlier, the energy crackling in the air, had all been part of a massive ritual to channel the power of the planet into this weapon. The ship, the rift, Caltha, it was all linked together in a nightmarish network of destruction. Caltha's voice echoed through their minds again, his tone mocking. "It is too late. You are too late." But this time, Ilara wasn't listening. She was thinking faster than ever before. The technology they had uncovered from the invaders, the cryptic messages, the ship, they weren't just pieces of a puzzle. They were part of the weapon Caltha was about to unleash. And there was a way to stop it. A way to use it against him. "Jaeger," Ilara said, her voice hard with realization. "We have to take that ship down. It's the key. Jaeger nodded, his eyes lighting up with understanding. You got a plan? I think so, she replied, already moving toward the ship. She was betting everything on a single, impossible idea. They could use the energy from the alien technology to sabotage the ship's core. They had already weaponized alien tech before. Now, they would have to use it in a way they hadn't imagined by using Caltha's own energy against him. As the resistance regrouped, they began to fight their way toward the ship. The battle became a blur of motion, gunfire, and desperation as the soldiers tried to keep the alien invaders at bay. Marx and her team held off the advancing troops while Elara and Jaeger moved toward the central energy core of the ship. The closer they got, the more intense the heat became. The energy in the air grew oppressive, and Caltha's power pulsed like a drumbeat, pushing against them. But they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. When Elara and Jaeger finally reached the ship's core, they found what they expected: a massive energy matrix that radiated with an eerie, unnatural light. It was like nothing they had ever seen, a swirling vortex of power, raw and untapped. Elara felt the force of it pressing against her, almost suffocating in its intensity. But in that moment, she saw the vulnerability. The power wasn't just Caltha's, it was the ship's too. The two were linked. Elara's hands flew over the console as she tapped into the network of alien tech they had reverse-engineered. She felt a surge of energy course through her as the system connected. This was it, the key. The ship's power grid was designed to extract energy from Caltha's being, but it was also vulnerable to the same forces that powered it. Elara turned to Jaeger, who had been watching her work, his face taut with concentration. This is it, she said, her voice steady but fierce. When I activate this, it will destabilize the core. It will take everything down. He nodded. Do it. With one final command, Elara activated the sequence. The entire base seemed to shudder as the power matrix began to crackle, its energy turning unstable. Caltha, sensing the shift, let out a howl that shook the heavens. His form flickered, his energy flickering with rage and disbelief. You cannot do this. But it was already too late. The energy began to implode, spiraling out of control. The ground cracked open once more as the ship's core began to destabilize, and the entire alien structure seemed to tear apart from within. The alien soldiers around them began to retreat, but it was clear that it was too late for them too. Caltha's form faltered, its immense power diminishing as the core of the ship began to collapse in on itself. In a final, blinding flash, the ship erupted in a surge of energy, sending shockwaves through the entire battlefield. The resistance forces were thrown to the ground as the alien forces were torn apart by the violent energy. When the dust settled, there was silence. The ship was gone. The rift had closed. Caltha, the entity that had loomed over humanity like an unstoppable force, was no more. But as Elara slowly rose to her feet, bloodied and bruised, her heart skipped a beat. There was still something wrong. Caltha might be gone, but the power it had wielded was still out there, still pulsing through the ground, through the air, through everything. But in that moment, humanity had made its stand, and they had won. The resistance had proven that even in the face of the impossible, their ingenuity, their courage, and their will to survive had been enough. The battle had ended, but the war's echoes would reverberate for years to come. As Elara stood amidst the smoldering ruins of the alien base, the weight of what had transpired slowly began to settle upon her shoulders. She could feel it in the air, the stillness after the storm. The alien ships had fallen, their power sources destroyed, their leadership erased. Caltha, the ancient entity that had threatened to consume their world, was gone, reduced to nothing more than the remnants of the energy storm that had consumed it. The rift that had torn through reality had sealed itself, leaving behind a landscape scarred by both destruction and strange, shifting energy. The immediate threat to Earth had been vanquished, but the price had been steep. The battlefield lay in ruins. Resistance fighters who had once fought with fire and determination now rested in quiet exhaustion, some forever silenced by the very forces they had tried to overthrow. The alien invaders, though broken, had left behind a world forever altered, a planet struggling to recover from the onslaught. Jaeger and Mark stood beside Ilara, their faces as battered as hers. The trio surveyed the wreckage, silent for a moment. No one spoke about the cost. The loss of life was staggering, and yet the victory, while necessary, felt hollow. Humanity had faced annihilation, and by sheer force of will, through ingenuity, sacrifice, and unity, they had fought back. But what had they lost in the process? "We did it," Mark said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. She looked over at Ilara, as though searching for some confirmation of the victory they had achieved. Ilara nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "We did. But at what cost?" Jaeger's voice was steady, but his eyes were filled with the weight of the answer they all knew. "We've stopped them. We've saved Earth. But this is only the beginning. The truth we uncovered, the ship, Caltha, everything, we've only scratched the surface." Ilara swallowed hard. "You're right. Whatever power that entity had, whatever it was using the Earth for, it's still out there." "What do you mean?" Marx asked, brow furrowed. "I mean, that energy, we haven't contained it. We've delayed the inevitable, but there's something about the power that Caltha harnessed. It doesn't just vanish. It's been absorbed into the planet. The land itself." She paused, considering the weight of her words. "That power is still a part of Earth now. And if we can't learn to control it well, we're just setting the stage for another disaster." Jaeger stepped forward, looking toward the horizon with grim resolve. "We won this war, but we can't afford to stop now. The fight has just begun. We have to ensure that humanity learns from this. We have to ensure this kind of thing never happens again." Marx exhaled deeply, her face a mask of exhaustion and resolve. "And we will. We'll rebuild. But we'll rebuild stronger. We'll teach our children about the mistakes that were made, about the sacrifices that led to this moment. And we'll teach them that humanity can never lose its ability to adapt, to grow, to fight." Ilara nodded. She looked at her friends, her allies, the people who had been with her from the beginning. They had done the impossible. Together, they had driven back an alien force that had seemed insurmountable. And yet, as they stood there, victorious, they truly understood that their survival was not the end of the story. The weeks that followed were a blur of recovery and reflection. The alien invaders had been scattered, their ships wrecked and abandoned, their leaders erased. But the damage to Earth was far-reaching. Entire cities had been destroyed, millions of lives lost. The resistance forces had risen from the ashes, but the true challenge was in the rebuilding. Humanity would have to recover physically, but emotionally and spiritually, the scars would take much longer to heal. The alien technology they had reverse-engineered was a key asset in this recovery, giving humanity new tools to rebuild. Yet it also carried risks. The energy Caltha had channeled into the planet was still there, a subtle but dangerous presence in the background of their newfound power. It became a race against time as the scientists and engineers of the Resistance worked tirelessly to understand the true nature of this energy. The immediate concern was harnessing it, ensuring that humanity's use of the technology wouldn't endanger the very planet they had fought so hard to protect.